Welcome back to the Measure What Matters series, video number 3, Chargebacks. I'm Gilit Saporta, Senior Director of Analytics for the product group at Double Verify, and I'm a fraud fighter.
And I'm Shoshana Maraney, founder of Longform Labs, and I've been making fraud easy to understand for nearly a decade. I'm also Gilit's co-author of Practical Fraud Prevention, a fraud analytics and data science training book published by O'Reilly in 2022. So, Fraudology, sponsored by Saporta, conducted a fraud benchmarking study back in early 2023 and asked fraud leaders which metrics matter most to you and your team. And there was a very clear winner. Chargebacks. Chargebacks are the bread and butter of fraud prevention, the key metric around which everything else revolves. Approval rate, manual review speed, customer experience impact, false positive rate, and other things, they are all important. But if you let chargebacks stay too high for too long, your company will stop being able to accept credit card transactions, which is almost another way of saying that you might as well shut up shop.
Yeah, the nightmare scenario. So understanding your chargeback rate is critical to ensure that, first, your company stays below the danger zone of 0.9% and over 100 chargebacks received in 1 month. Since above that, you'll be entered into Visa's dispute monitoring program, and other card networks have their own thresholds. You need to make sure that to check the ones that are relevant for your business. Secondly, understanding chargebacks is important so that you would know through chargeback rates how much direct loss is being caused to your business from successful fraud attacks, and that you know where to focus your efforts to fight fraud. So let's start with the basics. Chargeback rate is the total number of chargebacks out of the total number of transactions. So for instance, if a single attacker managed to sneak in 100 transactions last month and you have 1,000 transactions completed this month, your chargeback rate will spike to 10%.
That sounds simple, right? And in a sense it is. But as with everything fraud related, there's more than meets the eye. Fraud analysts need to be willing to dive into chargeback management in their company the same way they enthusiastically investigate fraud attacks. To start with, what kinds of chargebacks do you measure? Do you separate between fraud chargebacks and others? To quote the fraud benchmarking study again, 23% of respondents do not typically separate fraud chargebacks from other chargebacks. I can tell you, we were really shocked when we saw that result. It is vital to know what type of chargebacks your business is receiving because the solutions to different types vary considerably. Some aren't the province of the fraud department at all. In fact, non-fraud chargebacks typically reflect things that can be changed on a business level. Service experience, delivery times, clarity of product and company and billing, and so on. You might be able to flag the issues for the relevant departments and perhaps work with them to understand and resolve the underlying problems. It may be that they don't understand the really negative consequences of a chargeback to the business, for example. But this is business. It's not fraud. If you're not able to see which chargebacks are which, you won't be able to learn from and use them effectively to improve things for your business going forward.
So assuming you do distinguish between types of chargebacks, how do you do that? Often the answer is based on the reason codes received from the bank. However, the issuing bank's selection of fraud reason codes are sometimes something of a default, meaning more cases are marked as fraud chargebacks than really should be. This happens because fraud complaints, unlike service chargebacks, for example, can usually be filed without requiring consumers to give any extra information, so they're quite popular. And fraud teams that really want to ensure that they know the full story behind the chargebacks need to dive deeper into their data to understand the root causes behind individual chargebacks. Of course, that's not always possible for every single chargeback, but regular sampling and research is very valuable. Traditionally, your goal would be to prevent real fraud. There's also second-party fraud. These are seller fraud, service chargebacks that are relevant mostly for marketplaces that have to deal with the seller fraud. And there's also scams or first-party fraud.
Unfortunately, and increasingly, first-party fraud, first-party misuse also represents a chunk of chargebacks that are labeled as fraud. This is when a real customer makes a purchase and then charges back anyway. It's sometimes referred to as friendly fraud, although because there is nothing remotely friendly about it, that term is beginning to fall out of favor in the industry. We talk more about the different types of friendly fraud in the book, Practical Fraud Prevention. So if you want more detail, you can go there. But for the purposes of this video, what matters most is that friendly fraud cannot be stopped by the methods you typically use to identify bad actors attempting transactions, because it really is the real customer making the transaction. There are different types of friendly fraud, which is also important to understand when you're looking at chargebacks and how to prevent them. There are genuine mistakes. So that's something you might be able to prevent in future by making billing clearer. For example, if your company bills under a name that's not the same that the customer sees on the site, they might not know that this is the purchase that they made. There's family fraud. Think teenager swiping mum's credit card. There are buyers who start with good intent and then unfortunately change their mind when the bill comes. You see that a lot around the holidays when people spend more than they anticipated. You have customers who have good intent but resent poor experience. Or you have a buyer who always intended to lie right from the start. In the last case, you'll want to know, is this a pattern of behavior? And if so, what should your business policy be about this? And that's something that you may not be able to decide solo as the fraud department, but the information that you have will be vital in making the right decision as a company. Because friendly fraud counts against your chargeback rate, just like third-party fraud, it's typically the responsibility of the fraud department to try and prevent it and to alert the company if a problem is arising with increasing friendly fraud. The main point is you need to measure. Chargeback rate is a catch-all term, but as I hope we've shown, the devil really is in the details.
Absolutely. Now, another detail you want to watch out for is time. With chargebacks, the most common calculation is set by Visa and is also used by acquiring banks when combining Visa and MasterCard volumes. That calculation that Visa uses takes the chargeback count as received this month divided by the transaction count of this current month, even though many chargebacks are being received this month for payments that happened last month. Chargeback rates for Visa still look at current month volumes as the denominator. And we know not every month has the same overall volume. So you need to find out and watch out for seasonal trends, flash sales, holiday periods, product launches, and so on, that will impact chargeback metrics. You need to prepare for spikes that are likely just outside of your control. And when you present chargeback rates to management, you may want to be prepared for questions around this calculation. Also, in the context of time, note that there's typically a lag when it comes to feedback from chargebacks, especially for the real victims. It will take them a few days or even a month or two to notice that there were fraudulent charges and then initiate the chargeback reporting process. So it's important to know that in terms of measuring the impact of change you make to your own internal fraud system, when you're looking at chargebacks, it will take the time, even 2 or 3 months, to see the effect of any new process or technology, finally making a change in the lives of those real victims. This is also relevant when you look at the gap between Visa's and MasterCard excessive chargeback programs. We mentioned before that merchants entered Visa's program at 0.9%, but MasterCard's program only kicks in at 1%. So a company that was flagged by Visa still has a chance to fix their status before MasterCard comes knocking, but they do need to act quickly given this lag. Companies who don't mend their ways end up with fines and restrictions and eventually even a risk of losing the ability to process transactions via the major card networks. So it's important to take these factors seriously. And remember that if you're reporting to management or outside your team, they might not know that there is a delay built into chargebacks and that's just the way it works. So it is your job to provide the necessary context and clarity.
Which brings us to the last thing we want to cover in this video, which is your chargeback comfort zone. This is all about your company's approach to risk management, where you fall on the scale of wanting to stop all chargeback possible versus at the other end of the scale, being willing to skirt as close to the upper limit of the excessive chargeback programs as you safely can. There is no right or wrong answer to this question. It's important to bear in mind the need for a buffer, given that if you consistently aim for just below 0.9% and a sophisticated fraud ring attacks, you'll be in trouble. This is another area where you shouldn't do things the way you've always done them for the sake of tradition. Maybe you can afford to take a little more risk right now, if doing so could dramatically improve customer experience, and that's a company priority, or if it could improve approval rates, and that's currently a priority. Or maybe in your current situation, it might be worth being a little more cautious than you were previously.
As with everything else we've discussed so far in this video series, understanding how the chargeback rate is calculated in your organization should really not be something that only one person in the team understands. It's crucial context for every fraud fighter you have. Otherwise, how can you and your team work out what to improve and how?
So before diving into the next video in the series, here's what we hope you took away from this one. 1, understanding your chargeback rate is vital in order to track how much your company is losing to successful fraud, to work out where the weaknesses are in your system, and to ensure that you stay below the levels of the dispute monitoring programs. 2, it's important to separate fraud chargebacks from other chargebacks because the solutions required are different. 3, time is an important factor to bear in mind when you're thinking about chargebacks and to make sure that other people in your company understand. 4, what your ideal chargeback rate is may vary over time, depending on factors such as company goals and priorities, products, and so on. It's not only okay that that's the case, it's ideal that it should vary. As we've said before in the series, and we'll definitely be saying again, measurement and metrics are all about impact. This holds true with chargebacks as well. Understanding the details of your chargeback rate over time makes it possible to assess the impact of your fraud prevention work on your company. Being able to show how your efforts are keeping chargebacks low while approvals are high, showing your expertise through being able to explain how and why this is happening is key to proving your value to the organization.
With that, we hope that you've enjoyed this video in our Measuring What Matters series, and we will see you again in video number 4, Measuring Approval Rates.